If my shit will work, there we go. Welcome everybody! We got affiliate finally. Hope you guys enjoyed that little ad break. Alright. We got some fun stuff lined up today. Thanks to Lori in the Discord. Let me pull up some of that. She recommended 2 videos for us today. We're gonna be watching one on Eric July. I believe that's what it is. And then we're also going to be watching something on Am3nity, which I do know a little bit about her, but we'll wait to get into that one. Oh yeah, let's go.
Posted a video on Twitter and YouTube declaring that the bad...
Everybody buckle up, grab your snacks, grab whatever you need. Am I muted? I shouldn't be! Here, let me even double check. Actually, loud as fuck. Loud as fuck, boy. Cool.
So our old pal Eric July posted a video
if you guys
on
want
Twitter
captions,
and
let me know.
YouTube declaring that the bad guys in World War II were, in fact, socialists. What is happening here is a long-standing attempt by a certain batch of conservatives to associate socialism with Nazism and therefore make socialism out to be evil or criminal. I mean, that's not really conjecture, as Eric has tweeted as much. And this is probably going to be the most politically relevant video I've ever made, and I really hate that I have to do this because politics bore me to death, and I hate talking about this shit. But I'm here for a couple of reasons. The first is, this cleanly demonstrates that Eric July is a grifter that has weaseled his way into media discourse, which is the purpose of this series.
I don't even really understand too much about the politics and stuff.
Pipeline by now,
I pay attention in school,
look at
man.
Eric's channel, you can see clearly that he's trying his damnedest to break into the right-wing political grift, as that space is very lucrative for the dregs of society. The second reason is Eric basically challenged me to do this. You see, I quote tweeted him and said my piece and was going to leave it at that. But then he quote tweeted me, stating that I committed an ad hominem fallacy. And, you know, it kind of annoys me that a large percentage of this series has become me having to define words for these silly people. But that's not what an ad hominem means. An ad hominem is essentially avoiding the argument altogether while attacking the motive or character of your opponent. It does not mean you insulted someone. An example of an ad hominem is if person A says, seatbelts reduce the risk of death in car accidents, and then person B says, yeah, well, you failed high school, so your argument doesn't matter. This
Lori.
is what an ad hominem actually looks like.
Yeah, stop doing that to me,
anyway,
Lori.
Looking at my actual tweet, you can see that I did address the overarching argument by making the claim.
If you enjoy the Birdman video, we can find more Birdman vids because I find them really educational and interesting. I'm definitely down. Throw them in the fucking Discord.
That Nazis were socialist in name only, and that they used the term socialist for propagandistic purposes. Eric just didn't like the way I responded to his claim. But fine, Eric. I'll put your video in a blender and debunk you point by point if that's what you truly want.
I want to preface this by saying that I did a 30-minute plus video deep dive on this years ago. You should go check that out. And it's still true. Yes, the Nazis were socialists. And no, that does not mean they were Marxists, and it does not mean modern socialists are all Nazis. Let's get that out the way.
As has become standard in this series, let's define our terms.
That's a lot of
On
words.
Merriam-Webster, there are 3 definitions for socialism, but the third includes a reference to Marxism, which is what Eric says the Nazis did not subscribe to, so we can ignore the third and focus on the first 2. According to the dictionary, socialism is an egalitarian economic and political policy that advocates for the collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. In other words, socialism means shared or governmental control of key parts of the economy to reduce or eliminate inequality. The second definition states a system or society where there is no private property, which is a rather descriptive definition that speaks to one of the outcomes of socialism rather than what it actually means. But hey, this is what the dictionary says. That out of the way, Using the dictionary's framework, the claim Eric is making becomes that Nazi Germany's economic system sought to address inequality by having egalitarian policies that favored the German people having the means of production. It also suggests that there was no private property. Does that sound like Nazi Germany to literally any of you?
Not really.
Now, this
I don't
isn't
know.
what Eric is claiming, and therein lies the problem.
Like,
He
yeah,
doesn't know
but
what socialism actually means. Because if
it's
he
private property
did,
because, like,
he'd know
the
claiming
Germans, it was
Germany in the
theirs
late
because they took
30s and
it,
early
and they're just being
40s was
assholes.
socialist is a laughable claim.
I don't know shit
But the
about
issue
politics,
is
man.
that people like Eric have been trying to demonize socialism in this manner for a long time, so attributing the philosophy to Nazism is an easy way to accomplish this goal.
Like, private
Remember,
property's, like,
socialism
pretty
is
good, at least for
primarily an
the average
economic
Joe.
framework, not a form of government. Socialism tells you how the
Yeah, I'm just here
economy
enjoying
is
my cheese,
structured,
bro.
not how the government rules. As I mentioned on Twitter, there were many private organizations operating in a capitalistic framework during the Nazis' rule of Germany, including Daimler-Benz, IG Farben, and Krupp. As the second definition of socialism clearly explains, in a socialist society, there is no private property. This means those for-profit companies I just named simply could not exist in Nazi Germany if they were actually
Yeah.
socialist. But they did exist. So what the hell does Eric actually mean when he says the Nazis were socialist?
Now, why do people constantly get this wrong? It's because they treat socialism like it has only one valid form. Usually it's Marxism, and anything outside of that gets hand waved away. Historically, that's nonsense. Socialism has always been this family of ideas, and socialists have constantly fought other socialists. Proudhon fought
How much cheese is
Marx,
this?
Marx fought Lassalle, Lenin fought the Mensheviks, Stalin killed Trotsky.
How much is
The
fucking
whole
8
they
ounces?
killed other socialists has never
Dark a
been an
cup.
argument against the fact that they were actually socialists.
Once again, I remind the audience that socialism is an economic philosophy centered around reducing inequality. This means you can be a socialist but have wildly different ideas about how a government should be ran.
Whole
To
cup
put
of
it in
cheese.
comic book terms, what Eric just did is like
Oh, it's
saying
half a cup.
superpowered
Shit.
beings fight each other.
Google's wrong
Yeah?
for me.
Okay. Is there any more information you'd like to give? They share the trait of having superpowers, yes, but their motivations are entirely different. And what matters is their motivation, not the fact that they have superpowers.
So let's define this cleanly. At its core, socialism rejects true private ownership of means of production and prioritizes the collective over the individual. No matter how they claim to be anti-state, the state determines how property is used, who benefits, and in what quantities, always in the name of the common good.
You probably now see Eric's argument taking shape. He's attempting to position a socialist as a person that is, or claims to be, anti-state, only for the state to still then dictate the means of production. The problem with this framing is that it contradicts the definition of socialism. Literally, in the first definition, it states clearly, or governmental administration of the means of production. So, definitionally, societies where the state or the people control these elements are both still socialist. As I explained earlier, since socialism is primarily
He's saying that Nazi Germany basically only had the name socialism, not that it actually was like socialism, as the definition describes it. Yeah, that's what it seems to be.
concerned
We're
with
just throwing names
economic
around, is what it
policy,
seems like.
socialists can vary widely on how they
Not
view
us, like
government
the people that
operations.
you gotta do.
But in order for a society to not be socialist, aka capitalist, there would have to be private entities that own the means of production. In Nazi Germany, there were plenty of these types of companies. Earlier, I mentioned Krupp. This corporation was owned by Alfred Krupp, a Nazi sympathizer who later became one and participated in
He looks like a fucking Nazi sympathizer. Look at that face! He looks like a Nazi sympathizer, bro!
slave labor, of which he also profited from. Krupp was just one of many German businesses that profited from slave labor during World War II.
What the fuck?
This is incredibly important because slave labor is fundamentally antithetical to socialism. Again, socialism by definition requires that workers collectively own and control the means of production, and a slave owns nothing, controls nothing, and has no political or economic agency.
Yeah.
And yet, slave labor and the exploitation of conquered territories
people just
during the
wanted-
war was widespread.
Well, Eric is claiming they were socialists on the fact they had control of businesses, forgetting the fact that there are many types of socialism and capitalism. Yeah, there's lots of different types and subtypes. That's why I'm not trying to get too political. I'm just like, but that makes a lot of sense too. Definitely could still be, like, socialism in that regard, but just going off that definition, I'm like, if they don't, slaves don't own anything, and there's no private property in fucking Germany, and if it is, it's Germany owning their own fucking shit because they took it from people. So, like, that doesn't really sound like socialism by definition, but that's just me. I'm just a dumb girl.
Of German men are fighting
I just make videos. What do I know?
World War. To keep agriculture and the weapons industry running, the Nazi regime forces millions into forced labor. By the end of the war, there are up to 12 million
that doesn't sound like
forced
socialism, bro.
laborers, chiefly from occupied territories. Over half are women. They're taken to weapon production at Krupp. Many of the women are barely adult. The working prisoners live mostly in inhumane conditions in barracks. Alongside captured soldiers and deported civilians, more than 4 million prisoners from concentration camps are used as forced labor. German armament firms benefit from the forced labor. It is cheaper than regular workers. The industry only has to pay loan fees to the SS and the Nazi state. The military machinery requires ever more people to be forced.
Germany's basically just LARPing socialism. You know, guys, I'm ultra socialist. Yeah, that's basically what it seems like. They're just fucking LARPing, bro.
Into work.
But we want to be cool too.
Of rockets demanded by Hitler.
We're not doing shitty shit, even though we are.
Forced labor.
What you just heard is textbook state-directed capitalism, or the exploitation of people for the benefit of private industry enforced by the state. In fact, under the article for state capitalism on Britannica's website, they specifically list Nazi Germany as one of the examples. So literally nothing Eric can say changes how the Nazis actually operated, as documented by history. What Eric believes he's describing is actually state-directed capitalism. Here, listen to him.
No matter how they claim to be anti-state, the state determines how property is used, who benefits, and in what quantities, always in the name of the common good. And this is exactly what Nazi Germany did.
As you can see on this Britannica article, Eric just described state capitalism, not socialism. In both state capitalism and certain socialist societies, the state can take over private businesses, which is what's confusing Eric. Where they differ is who ultimately benefits. In a state capitalist society, private capital or the state itself benefits. In a socialist society, state involvement exists to transfer ownership and control to workers or the public, rather than to preserve private profit or benefit the state itself. This is why socialism doesn't accurately describe Germany at that time. They had slave labor specifically to benefit the war effort and private capital, not to benefit the German worker.
Under the Nazis, businesses were not private.
Even then, being a slave doesn't benefit you as a worker. What the fuck?
Here is where you can tell Eric is
yes,
being
I'm a slave to
dishonest, and his
Walmart.
argument starts to show kinks. He knows Germany
Hey,
had
yo.
private, for-profit
Keep the kinks on
businesses at
OnlyFans.
that time, but he baselessly claims they weren't meaningfully private. This is vague language that doesn't mean anything. Again, there were plenty of privately owned businesses during the Third Reich that didn't primarily benefit the Nazis or their war effort. In fact, the microphone that I'm speaking to you all with, the Neumann U87, was made by one such company, George Neumann. Neumann wasn't controlled by the Nazis, and their profits mainly went to George. Actually, Neumann's wife was a Jew, and George actively fought against the Nazis' attempts to prosecute her. And his factory was literally bombed by the Allies in 1943, so they had all the reason to support the war effort, but he didn't. Eric does not know what he's talking about.
Yes, names stayed on buildings, but the state dictated prices, the wages, production quotas, suppliers, buyers, profits, and labor allocation. If you didn't comply, your business was seized or abolished. That is state control of means of production, and it's not capitalism.
Wrong.
Literally not true, as the founder of the company I just spoke about was not controlled by the Nazis in any way, and he actively repelled their attempts to harm his Jewish wife. Seriously, I ask the audience, do you think this guy has thoroughly vetted every German business in the 1930s and 40s to make the claim that he's making? Because if you answered yes, you might just be brain dead.
And again, if you look at the history of socialism, statism is not separated from it. You have
Got apple
those
juice
like
too.
the Ferdinand Lassalle's of the world that were openly statist, and then you have others trying to redefine what statism actually is to pretend to be separated from it.
This was a meaningless assortment of words. Political philosophy is an ever-evolving field of study. Refining definitions to more accurately describe political philosophies is something that should be encouraged. That's how you get to the truth of a thing, constant stress testing and refinement. But that's the inherent problem with conservatism, being averse to change, even if that change is beneficial to society.
On the other hand, capitalism requires exclusive control and voluntary exchange. The Nazis had neither.
This is incorrect. Excluding all the other examples I've already provided, state capitalism is a hybrid system that turns the state from a referee to one of the owners. In historian Richard Overy's book, War and Economy in the Third Reich, he
Eric July is like me on a history test, redefining historical events and terms. Just praying I get it correct. Bro, me too.
states that
Me too.
German businesses were able to build up assets and reward shareholders during the Third Reich. Clear evidence of a state capitalist economy, not socialism. It's true that certain companies important to the war effort, like oil companies, made deals with or outright submitted to the government. But A, this was not every German business, and B, even those businesses still recorded profits. According to a paper by Cambridge University, private businesses, quote, preserved a good deal of their autonomy even under the Nazi regime, end quote.
They had price controls, wage controls, production mandates, massive welfare programs, forced labor, nationalized industry, central planning. Even Hitler explicitly rejected free enterprise and economic liberalism repeatedly.
This is one of those instances that proves these grifters use words without knowing what they mean. Free enterprise, as historians use the term, means independent private businesses, minimal state interference, market-driven business decisions, and the freedom to produce, hire, price, and invest without political direction. This is called laissez-faire capitalism, which is a very dangerous type of capitalism.
What's Eric's obsession with showing the symbol? It's like the third time. Yeah, he just be loving showing that symbol, bro.
Capitalism that almost always results in some morally bankrupt company dumping toxic waste in your drinking water. It's the short-sighted shit conservatives consistently vote for that ruins the environment, because fuck everybody else, I guess. Yes, Hitler rejected these concepts. However, what Hitler actually supported was, again, what historians refer to as state capitalism, because he preserved private ownership, protected profits, allowed shareholders, and relied on industrialists that he made deals with. Yes, the state exercised a modicum of control over certain aspects, but that's why it's called state capitalism.
He openly said the individual must serve the community, not the other way around. That's socialism.
It's literally not. That quote has no meaning on its own. If the means of production are owned by the people or the state that then relinquishes control to the people, then that quote references socialism. However, that quote is in reference to state capitalism if the community is personified by the state, which it was in the Third Reich. It's hilarious that this man started this video suggesting there were many types of socialism, but for some reason isn't aware of the various types of capitalism.
Now, was it Marxist socialism? No, it was more National Socialism, a collectivist, anti-capitalist system built around race instead of class. Same economic structure, different justification. Socialism for whites, if you want to be blunt.
This man has now gone completely off the rails. What's funny about this is the very reason this guy quote tweeted me was to suggest that I didn't address his actual argument when I said that Nazis were socialist in name only. But you all heard him mention the name of the Nazi party, right? How he claimed ad hominem against my tweet is pretty fucking embarrassing. Their name has nothing to do with anything. You might as well say that I am a bird man because my channel's name is Th3birdman. In fact, National Socialism doesn't even really mean anything. As I stated on Twitter, they chose that name as a marketing tactic because in the early 20th century, the word socialist was popular. I'm not kidding. That's literally the reason National Socialist was chosen for the name of the party.
And before someone says, but they privatize things, no. If the state tells you how to run your business, what to produce, how much to sell, who to sell to, and at what price, you don't own it. You're a manager for the state.
This is why you need a real historian speaking about this topic and not some guy that barely knows what these words even mean.
Hello?
The Third Reich was unique
That's
in a lot
me.
of ways, and this was one of them. By definition, they were state capitalists, and nearly everything they did served capitalism in some fashion, most explicitly the usage of slave labor and allowing shareholders to receive dividends. It's true Hitler opposed free market capitalism, but that is one type of capitalism. Eric seems to believe free market capitalism is the only type. I mean, he mentioned welfare as being indicative of socialism, which means he's clearly unaware of welfare capitalism. Do your Googles.
That's not privatization, bros. That's socialism with extra paperwork. This is why the economists like Ludwig von Mises, who fled Nazis, explicitly classified Nazi Germany as a form of socialism.
Yes, Mises was a free enterprise economist who had very similar views you do, Eric. I'm not surprised he ended up in your video. Ludwig was also heavily criticized for having an inflexible mind and on his stance on knowing things without ever having experienced
Welfare
them.
capitalism is just America right now.
He was often
Yeah.
criticized for literally not knowing what he was talking about, or as Whittaker Chambers put it, Mises's thesis that anti-capitalist sentiment was rooted in envy epitomized know-nothing conservatism at its know-nothingest. In other words, ya mama. My point is that this figure was cherry-picked and does not represent the modern consensus on the Third Reich's economy.
He distinguished it between the German model and the Russian model, but not between socialism and capitalism. Different flavors, same disease. And this pattern repeats throughout history. Socialism promises the collective good, but it centralizes power, crushes dissent, purges enemies, and leaves massive suffering in its wake. Nazis weren't an exception, they were a variation.
These are propagandistic lies often spread by conservatives and right-wingers seeking to preserve exploitative capitalistic structures. Again, socialism is an economic framework about ownership of production, not a system of governance. It doesn't prescribe how a state treats its people. Socialist economies can exist under authoritarian regimes or liberal democracies, just as capitalist economies can. This weak attempt to paint socialism as inherently evil by incorrectly attributing the philosophy to Nazis only exposes that you don't know what these terms actually mean. The United States currently has socialist programs that you benefit from, Eric. Public infrastructure is a system we all have universal access to, and it's not subject to market failure or demand. The United States Postal Service is a socialized public service that is literally owned by the government and has a universal service obligation that is written into law. A letter costs the same to mail whether it goes across the street or across the country, and you can't be denied service because you're poor. Is USPS crushing dissent and purging enemies?
So no, we don't get to say that it wasn't real socialism just because it ended badly. And you don't get to call it capitalism when private property didn't exist in practice. You can say that it wasn't your socialism, whatever. But historically, economically, and philosophically, the Nazis were
not socialists. Finally, common ground. So, was that good enough for you, Eric? Did I ad hom you this time? Notice how I have actual sources and you have floating PNGs of men that may have said things at one point in time? Look, I know it doesn't take much to please the mouth-breathing lunatics you court on Twitter, but you'd be much better served sticking to grifting on movies that feature Brie Larson or some shit. You know absolutely nothing about these topics, and your desperation to regain relevance by shifting to the right-wing political grift is rather embarrassing. You're not Kobe. They don't love you like that.
Oh yeah, let's go. I gotta grab water at least. I'm fucking thirsty, bro. Give me a sec. Alright. Illuminati! Alright.